Hello and welcome to Blissful Parenting. I'm your host, Michelle Abraham, bringing you another fabulous guest today. I'm super excited. I met this woman a few weeks ago and was just so inspired by her story. And I just thought that we needed to bring her on the show like soon because this is a topic that's coming up in more and more family conversations. And it's definitely a tricky one to navigate around. So I'd love to introduce you to Jennifer Manleey today. She is an addiction strategist. Jennifer is the founder of Manleey Consulting, which is a coaching firm with families who have loved ones in addiction or trauma related substance abuse. So she works with families to help them develop strategies and coach them on getting set in effective, supportive, and loving boundaries so their loved ones can get the help that they need. I think that's so amazing, Jennifer. And along with the coaching she does, she's also written a book, which is #1 best-selling author of Dear Parents, Strategies to Help Your Loved Ones Through Addiction. And I think that was one of the things that really caught my attention about Jennifer's book. Like, oh, Dear Parents, I'm like, this is going to be a good one because she's gone through all this herself and is now on the other side and helping parents through this whole situation with their kids. So welcome, Jennifer. Thank you for being on our show today. I'm super excited to dive into this topic with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am so honored to be on your show and here and talking to your parents about this stuff. I think it's hugely valuable to get the right information for if this ever happens, down the line. So
Absolutely. Like, I think the more we can hear about this conversation and open this conversation up now, well, maybe some of our kids are still a little bit on the young side, like mine are. I know for our families that have been listening for a few years now, their kids are now growing older, and this is maybe something that they're facing now in their homes. So I'd
yeah.
love to just back up the story a little bit. So
Mhm.
can you tell us a little bit about how this came to be a business for you and how this all came about in your family?
Sure. Well, so as you kind of had mentioned, like I had been through my own sets of addictions and stuff, and it took me a long time to even figure out for myself that I had a problem. And I see a lot of other people really struggling with that concept as well, whether it's on the family side or whether it's, the person that's using substances. This is a very tricky area for people to be able to admit that this is happening. But I finally got to the place where I could admit it, and I started getting some help for myself. And as the years went on and I get into recovery and I'm doing really well, all of a sudden, I got into like corporate leadership of all places, really. So I went back to college. I started working with the senior executive leadership coach, and we were going into companies, and I was kind of started out as like her content manager, the back end person, kind of just doing the stuff. And then she started realizing some other like really great skills that I had and started putting me more in front of her own like clients. And then interesting thing that started happening was these senior executives had these kids that were really struggling. And so they were coming to me and asking for like suggestions, help, advice, guidance. And I always wanted to offer that service in terms of just giving back and just really wanted to help them. But there's so much that goes into it and so many dynamics. It was really hard in just one phone conversation or two phone conversations to get them where they needed to be. And they didn't. And I always wanted to offer them more. And I was like, please call me, please use me, please, all this stuff, because I really, really wanted them to get the support and help that they needed while their kids, their loved ones were going through all this stuff. And when I say kids, I mean, these could be the 15-year-olds that are medicine cabinet shopping, or anywhere from your 25, 30-year-old, that's still doing, because they're always going to be your kids, no matter how old they get. If they're 50 years old, they're still always going to be your kids. So that's how I refer to them, but it's not necessarily just like the little tiny ones, right? But they weren't using me because they weren't going to abuse my time, but I really wanted to support them. And so that's really when I branched out on my own and created a business, because I was like, well, maybe if we just kind of formatted it and set it up so that they're paying for that service, they would utilize me like they needed to. And they would just say, well, I'm paying for this, so I'm going to show up for myself. And basically that's what people do, is they show up for themselves. Like I could have gone off and done a whole lot of other things. But I really, really wanted to support that community and created a business out of it so that they could get the help that they needed.
That's amazing. So is that where your first clients first came from, that group of executives whose kids
Yes.
were struggling? Interesting. And is that still the case today? Those are still the same sort of clients?
Sometimes, but not always. Now it's kind of morphed into some different sets of people. So I have people anywhere that are coming to me from, they're a little older, they're retired, or they're on a fixed income, or, they're just these kind of not senior executives. And so I've really have developed a lot of different programs to meet everyone's needs, because they think that everyone has needs that are different. I wanted to make sure that everyone was able to support. So no, it's not just the corporate, although, that is kind of like my specialty, but at the same time, I've worked with a large range of people. So
That's great. And so for us parents listening to this today, maybe we don't necessarily have an issue in our household yet. What are some things that we could be doing as a preventative measure, just to like open up the conversation with our kids? And how young is too young to start this conversation with
yeah.
them?
I think, I don't know that, so there's not necessarily a specific age, but I do know, like, when they start getting in their teenage years and they start trying to look and find themselves, and, you can really tell if it's going down a certain road by who they're hanging out with. What are some of the needs? If they've had some traumatic events, they're at higher risk. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the case, but there's certain criteria or things that I've experienced that we kind of all have, and trauma is a big one. And so when you start looking at that, when we are able to kind of sit back, and I think the biggest help that parents can do, even from a young age, is start allowing them to figure things out for themselves. Support them, love them, but allow them to fix their own problems. And I think that, when they're still in the house and they're still teenagers, even in high school, sometimes parents can really, they want to fix all their problems, especially if trauma is involved, and especially if they have some sort of guilt or shame involved in that trauma. They want to they want to fix it, and sometimes the kids' problems aren't the parents' problems to fix. People have to kind of figure that stuff out for them, but being supportive and loving through it is very much a big thing, but not to necessarily fall into that enabling, which is very, enabling looks a lot like fixing the problem.
Right. So the traumas we're talking about, like right now, would be like, like a bullying situation at school, maybe, or like a boyfriend, girlfriend breaking up situation, or maybe, friends not being nice kind of situation in high school. Those kind of the traumas we're talking about. Or are we talking about more deeper, harder traumas that, like, a separation in the family or a death in the family, or those kind of traumas, you think?
A lot of times my experience isn't necessarily like, oh, the person broke up with their significant other in high school kind of trauma. It is more of that, like, deeper level. Maybe there was like sexual abuse, physical abuse. Maybe it was a death of a parent or someone close to them, especially from a young age. It usually happens during those critical development, that brain development at 8 and younger. If there's trauma from 8 and younger, it kind of does some things to the brain, but it doesn't mean that they're destined for addiction. It just means that's something that they're at a little bit higher risk.
Yeah, to be aware of that. So I think my parents, and we've talked about this before, like I wasn't really inclined to, like, get into the drugs and alcohol in high school. I mean, the drinking probably, but not not so much the drugs.
Yeah.
But and one of the things that my parents said to me like later on in my 20s is that they're glad that they did this, is that they were really involved in like, do you guys need a ride somewhere? Can we pick you up from somewhere? Like call us at any time of the night, like, and by driving us like to the movies or to the mall, they got to overhear conversations about what was happening, though although we weren't necessarily sharing with them, we were forgetting that they're in the car, and that they were over kind of getting an idea of who our friends were, and like
Yeah.
the conversations that we were having and the places that we were going and things like that. And they thought that was probably one of the better things that they did as parents, to
Absolutely.
kind of like be involved in their lives without being overly like stepping their boundaries kind of thing.
Right. And I think that's a good point, where it's like you want to be involved in the kid's life. Know what's going on and support them through their problems. Like don't necessarily fix it for them, but as teenagers, and I think sometimes parents can go very reactive when they see certain things, because they're like, well, I know what I did as a teenager. And, like they get like overly suspicious or overly angry at certain situations. And I was never, even for me in high school, was not when I just started developing my problems. Actually, after high school, when I got out of the house. But I was never really taught, and this, hindsight being 2020, this is just the way it is. It's never the parents' like responsibility if addiction happens, or fault.
Mm-hmm.
But hindsight being 2020, it's like I was never taught how to really handle freedom. I was never taught how to solve a problem. So like if I went to a party and I got too drunk in high school, when my parents were able to be there to kind of talk me through what happens with drinking too much, what happens in that supportive and loving way. It was just like, no, it's my way or the highway kind of, vibe. And yes, my mom will probably listen to this, and we've had many conversations about this. So she's, we are very open about that time period of the shoulda, coulda, wouldas. And that's one of them where it's like, I just never really knew how to deal with freedom. So when I got out of the house, I didn't know how to deal with anything, and I didn't have the support from my parents to kind of teach me at that point. So
interesting. So what do you think some parents could do now that would kind of encourage those kind of boundaries or those kind of conversations to like help their kids feel more prepared for that like total freedom, and not just like the wild, like, so it's like when actually, I kind of experienced that myself, where the day after I graduated high school, I was on a plane to Switzerland, and they lived there for a year as a nanny. I got a job, but so I was living in another family's house, but like every weekend I was out partying all nights of the hour with all my friends there, and like, I did have a lot of like fun and a lot of craziness, and like now to think about my daughter doing that, I'm like, oh, not sure. But
yeah, yeah,
I
it's
feel like
scary.
I feel like I was I felt prepared for that, though. Like I felt like I knew how to be responsible. I knew how to like stop drinking at a certain time to like make sure I'd catch my last train home, and if I didn't, I knew I'd have to sleep in the train station. Like Europe, like it's very different, and like no parents to call in the middle of the night to come pick you up, right?
Right.
So I think going from that, knowing like I had the parent support in high school, and then afterwards knowing that I didn't have that parent support because they were on the other side of the world. This is before email and before FaceTime and before
Right.
all that kind of stuff. It was like it was something that had to be like it had to be on me, right? Like it was an interesting. I haven't really thought about it in that way until you just said that. Then, but
It's
interesting.
it's a hugely crucial thing, that allowing people their consequences while they're still under your roof, while you're helping them and teaching them. So it's not like, well, if they're doing something that's worth being grounded over, ground them, and teach them a lesson, but make sure you explain why they're being grounded, and that anger and that fear, because a lot of times I think what happens is parents react out of fear and they get angry, and that can really come through. It can actually really push that kid away, as opposed to allowing them the freedom to come and talk about certain situations. We're like, and I want to say this because this is a very uncomfortable thing for for parents to talk about, including like my mom. I think she had a difficult time talking about this with me, but as addiction and trauma related substance abuse goes, we don't have a good sexual health either. And that's hugely important, because when it comes to addiction, we do a lot of damage to our sexual health. And that because a lot of us aren't taught, what does sexual health look like? And unfortunately, as uncomfortable as it is for parents to talk about their teenagers about sexual health, that's when teenagers start having sex, is in their teenage years, under your roof, at home, or when they go off to college. Pretty quickly, that's when it is happening. And we don't know about the sexual health at that point. And that is very much tied into substance abuse, you know? And I know that a lot of people don't even think about that, and they shy away from that conversation. But if we shy away from that, then they can't come and talk to the parents about what's happening. And if you just say, no, you're not allowed to have sex, well, they're probably going to do it anyway.
And do it more than they would have normally if you just let them do it.
Right. And they don't have guidance or wisdom through healthy sexual practices.
Yeah, that's a good point. Wonder like if in Finland, right? Finland, they are very open and they talk about all these things, and actually don't the teenagers get some sort of like sexual orientation package or some sort of thing like that when they turn of a certain age or whatever. But yeah, it's really interesting how like the more they talk about it, you know, the less likely it is to be an issue, right? And
it's so uncomfortable. I get it. But
yeah, we've had Amy Lang on the show before, and she's the birds, the bees, and kids .com, and she's just fantastic about like how to bring this up in conversation and have these awkward conversations, and she makes them really funny too. So she was really great to go back and listen to that episode with her. She was awesome.
I'm gonna listen to that episode.
Yeah, she's really great.
I think it's a really hugely important thing to know how to do. Now, normally when the parents come to me, we're way beyond that topic, but this is the proactive version of saying, you know, my kid's at risk. Maybe we need to start looking at how to make sure that they don't go down that road.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So do you think like in when the kids are in high school, then like what does that look like for parents, like on a day-to-day basis? Like, do we let them have more free reign than we would normally like, but we have that conversation? Or like how, I don't even know how to, like that would look on a day-to-day basis.
And I think there's a balance with that. And one of the things that I think is hugely important is like, and what I tell parents, so when they come to me, and this relates to even how they are in high school. So when they come to me, I make sure they understand that I never tell a parent what boundaries they need to be setting. I think it's really important that the parents build off of their own foundation and set the boundaries that they feel the most comfortable with while being of service to their kids and to themselves, most importantly. You know, like, so how it looked for me, and I can speak for me, where my mom was a really, really busy person. She was that senior executive at a very large bank, and she was mostly raised me by myself. That I did have a stepdad enter into my life at 13, but for the most part, like, she's the one that kind of spent the most time raising me and building that foundation. And she was so busy that it was, we didn't really have time to go into all of this stuff. And a lot of times, even growing up, like, she would say, as I'm dealing with my addiction and as I'm dealing with all of this stuff, she's like, oh my God, I just don't have time to deal with this. Had she had made just a little bit of time prior to, because, you know, hindsight being 2020, but carving that time out for the kids to really connect, to really be present, not just out of obligation because you want to hang out with your kids, is hugely impactful on the kids' foundation and stability. So I think that it's important to listen to your kid and what they have to say about what are their needs. What are the boundaries that they need? Because they will tell you if you're listening carefully enough. So I think that's important is like parents need to listen to the kids about what they're telling them and then set boundaries from that place that are not reactive, that are
Yeah, that's good.
responsive.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, one of the things that my parents did again in the teen, and I've talked to them about this before, like they were young parents, like they were I think I'm in their 30s when I was in my teens. And so,
Mhm.
like, I remember I think I was 12 at my mom's 30th birthday. Like, so we like pretty young. And so one of the things that they say afterwards, I had no idea what they were doing, but I think one of the things that I took away from their parenting skills when I tried to parent my own kids is that they would always say that they trusted my judgment and they trusted me to make
Mhm.
good decisions and that I had a good head on my shoulders and that I would do the right thing given the opportunity. And they always believed that until proven wrong, which I think
Right.
that was quite good. And I felt like that if I was in trouble or if I was going to do something wrong, they would pop up in my head and be like, I was never afraid of getting in trouble with them. Never. It was more of, I was afraid of disappointing them or like letting them down because they had said they trusted me in my judgment. Right. So and I don't know if that's the right way or the wrong way, but it seemed to have like every time I went to go do something that I knew I shouldn't have, I was like, do I have to like look at them and like tell them that I like did this and then like them be disappointed or whatever, right? Like I remember a particular situation where I got my driver's license and I was about to drive all my friends home from a party and I got pulled over by the police for drinking and driving and I hadn't wasn't drinking and driving, they thought I was. And so I remember like going through my head, I'm like, oh, they're gonna be so disappointed because they let me have the
Yeah.
car tonight and drive my friends around. And it's one of those things that I think that seemed to have worked for me. I don't know if that's the good way or the right way or the wrong way, but it seemed to have been something that worked for me, I think.
I think I really, really do believe that giving people freedom and the trust and empowering the
Mm,
kids to make those decisions and then being able, like when they make a decision that's probably not of service to them, allow them to learn from it.
mm,
Allow them to grow from it. But maybe you do have to ground them if they make poor decisions, but make sure they understand why. And usually the kids will be really responsive if like they know they made a bad decision, and you just
mm,
allow them the freedom to really learn from that and
mhm,
not feel like they are getting in trouble, but that they are being allowed their consequences to their
mhm,
behaviors,
mhm.
and that's hugely important, is letting them learn how to take responsibility for themselves and allow them their consequences.
Right.
But you also have to set up those conditions and expectations that says, if this happens, then this is what's going to like transpire. So if you make this
Right.
decision, then this is what we're going to have to do. And then they already
Mm.
know, they're signing up for it,
Yeah, like you go out drinking tonight. There's a 6 a.m. alarm clock on the side of your bed. We're gonna get up and go for a walk,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Exactly. So it's like, yeah, if you're waking up hungover, we're going to continue about the day and you're grounded, but you're going to have to suffer through the hangover and
Yeah.
learn that lesson. But a lot of people do go into fear in those
Mhm.
situations and they get really reactive because they're scared.
Mm.
But taking a deep breath and just responding to stuff like that and saying, what do I want my kid to learn right now? Because they're
Yeah.
gonna drink. More than likely they
So
are
scary. Yeah.
but they need to learn what are the
Yeah.
consequences for the
Mhm.
drinking, and so I
Mm.
think that's hugely valuable.
Yeah, those are some great tips. Anything else before we let you go? And we could talk about this topic all
I
day
know.
long, I think, because there's so many things that we need to learn as parents to
They're
really help us like get through these kind of scary times that are
scary.
ahead for a lot of people. The teen years used to be like, a scary time. And
It is
especially with
scary.
all the technology and all the new the new drugs that are out there and the things that are really dangerous right now. So how do you have any tips for how to navigate our way around those things in the times that there are right now?
I think the number one tip that I want for parents to come away with, I think, is that as human beings in general, parents, me, you, I don't think we do this by ourselves. We don't know everything. And I don't claim that parents
Mhm.
should always know everything about everything, right? And I think that if there's a challenge or a struggle and someone's sitting back going, I don't know how to deal with this, find someone that can be a guide to help you through, like that. And that's kind of what I do, is I just simply guide people to bring the best versions of themselves to the table through this. I just don't tell everybody what to do. And I think that in this world, there's so many people that know, like your podcast where the birds and the bees and that person, like, a lot of parents are going, I have no idea how to talk to my child about this.
Yeah.
Find help. Get help. If you're sitting there going, I don't know how to deal with this, someone else does. Allow them to help you.
That's a good point. And quickly, before we wrap up again, what are some signs that we should be looking for that maybe our kids are in trouble, and maybe
Yeah.
hiding?
So if there is trauma, if you can start seeing, and sometimes parents don't know that there's trauma,
Mhm.
but if you do know there's trauma, that's a big one. If they seem to start falling in with like the quote unquote wrong crowd, it's because they're looking for a connection.
Mm.
And figure out what it is that they need to be connected to. So if they do start doing that, that's a big sign. If they start isolating, if they start pushing away from you, if they have siblings and they feel like they're not good enough, or they're constantly being compared to their siblings, or they're trying to get the attention from the parents in unhealthy ways, those can be some signs. It's not a definite, but it's definitely triggers. It's definitely red flags to be paying attention to.
Yeah, something definitely to be looking out for. So thank you for those tips. Those are really
Yeah.
helpful. And Jennifer, where can we find out more information about you? How can we work with you and take us there?
So you can, the best place to go is actually my website. It's maneleeconsulting.com. Manleey is spelled Maneely, and then consulting.com. And I have, my program is there. I give my free version of the ebook that I wrote that you had mentioned about from there. So that's the best way to get into contact with me.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. This has been super valuable, and I hope parents out there, you're listening to the things that Jennifer's been saying, and the tips she's given us have been fantastic. And I really do wish you luck in the teen years. And and if we can just have those conversations earlier on, I think be open, connect with your kids, spend time with them. I think that will help us through these scary years, right? All right. Thank you, Jennifer, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.